Thank you, Zakele, for the introduction, and it's a pleasure for me to speak to all of you today. I would like to first thank the Secretary General, of course, for inviting us to speak about the One HR Center, and it was hoped that our Assistant Secretary General for Human Resources, Ms. Marta Elena Lopez, could attend this session and speak to you today, but she sends her regrets. So I will speak to you today in her stead. And as Zakele mentioned, I transferred to Bonn in March 2020. And I don't think I need to do more marketing for Bonn as a city to live in with what I have behind me. This is an evening shot of the UN premises. Now, let me dive quickly into the presentation, a case study about One HR. And I wish, because that would be really quite the introduction, that I could tell you that the idea for the UN One HR Center was developed either in a laboratory or at the International Space Station. But I'm afraid I cannot. The idea for the UN One HR Center was really quite a simple one, although as it always turns out to be much more difficult to implement. And this was really in 2015, 16, when the UN started to seriously think about reforms, where the organizations of the UN system, and we have more than 30 organizations, and they come together numerous times a year in multiple fora, started to think about reform in the human resources area, and essentially thought if we have all these human resources activities that we all have to undertake, and we all use the same standards for these activities, doesn't it make sense to actually look at a global HR center that can offer these services to all of us, as opposed to all of us doing this ourselves? So it's really an economies of scale thought, thinking about working better together, working more efficiently together, and this has really become one of the core pillars of the UN Secretary General's management reform, yeah, that's why I'm glad that I can speak to you today about the One HR Center. And I'm going to now try to pull up the presentation. So I have a little PowerPoint presentation, and Zakele, if you could give me a thumbs up when we are live with the presentation. Fantastic. Okay. Just taking you back a couple of years, as I said earlier, the first discussions about such a One HR Center started around 2015, 2016, and in 2017, the HLCM, on behalf of the chief executives of all the UN system organizations, decided to establish this One HR Center. And it was at that time agreed that the center would offer non-prescriptive, so it wasn't mandated for the organizations to use the center, job classification services and background verification services. Although it was noted at that time that other services, other HR-related services could be added in the future. Now, the value proposition of the One HR Center, and this is why I mentioned earlier that the idea itself is not terribly exotic, is that when you all undertake the same services, it makes sense to do that together, to integrate these services in one location, with the idea that you'd be able to do it faster than when you would be able to do it yourself, or then when you would do it yourself in-house, that it would cost less, be cheaper. And for the UN system, it's obviously very important that we harmonize. It may sometimes seem from the outside that all the UN system organizations are fully harmonized on every level. But I have to admit that that's definitely not always the case. And even when it comes to human resources, although most of our member states are member states for all the different organizations, there are quite a number of differences. So harmonization is really an important element in the thinking about One HR.
Sorry to interrupt you, Bart. Can I just ask you just for the speaker view, just to put your slideshow in slideshow mode so we don't see the other slides on screen at the same time. I do apologise for interrupting. It's just at the top of the screen. You see slideshow and you press from current slide. So keep going up to the middle of the screen. Slideshow is an extra animation, so it's keep going up. Your cursor's almost there. You see?
Maybe I'll do it here. Slideshow.
That's it, and then from current slide, that's it. That's like the second one along. That's it. Perfect. Okay, and then it's just a case of clicking through. Thank you. Sorry for that.
No. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Thanks, Robert. Here we are in 2021 now. So 4 years into the One HR Center. As I said, the focus is on job classification and background verification. At the moment, we have 11 UN system organizations that use the One HR Center for job classification. We have 10 organizations that use the One HR Center for background verification. I put in parentheses and counting because the number of organizations is growing. Although, and I'll come to that in a moment, it's not growing fast enough, we feel. And that's why we're currently working on some quite fundamental improvements to the business model and to the service model. And I think after 4 years into its existence, that's an opportune moment to actually do that based on the experience that we've obtained. And maybe I should add, because this is interesting, of course, for the forum, the United Nations or the international. I have to quickly check so that I'm not making a mistake in the abbreviation. The International Telecommunications Union, my apologies, is one of the UN system organizations, which is at the moment not yet a client of the One HR Center, but hopefully that will happen in the fairly near future. Let's go to the next slide. So just a closer look at the value proposition, because I think this is really the core strength of the One HR Center. Looking at it through the lens of job classification. Almost every UN system entity engages in job classification. It's essentially associating a set of duties and responsibilities to a particular grade, so that we are sure that within the system that all staff members who undertake the same complexity of assignments are paid the same. So it's an element of equality there. So we all use the same standards. Now, if that's the case, then it does make a lot of sense to actually have this process, this job classification process, conducted in one location, which is what we do through the One HR Center. But there's another element that helps the value proposition of the One HR Center, which is that organizations can now start through our database use jobs that have been classified in one organization by the One HR Center directly without requiring a new classification exercise. So it's all a little bit predicated on the idea of mutual recognition, which is a term that comes up quite a lot. I'm sure also in your sphere of work, where you will work, and that's, as I said, that's the underlying assumption here. If the One HR Center, because we all use the same standards, classifies a job for one organization, we can use that for the other organization. And then there's a third element is that we are currently diving much deeper into the possibility of using generic job descriptions. Again, the idea is not that dissimilar from using a classified job in one organization, also in the other organization, to actually use generic job descriptions that only need to be classified once, and that all organizations can then use for a quite wide range of jobs. To give an example, I'm a lawyer by training, so that's why this is for me an easy example. Every organization needs lawyers, and these lawyers do different or undertake different tasks in the organization. When you look at the complexity, you might well be able to put them all at depending on where they are in the hierarchy, at the same level. So you would need you can use a really narrow skeletal job description for a legal officer, essentially, that organizations can then use. And of course, they can fill out the details of what that incumbent in the job would have to do based on exactly what that organization's mandate is. As I said, we allow now the organizations to use OneHR to look at information that is already, or jobs that have already been classified. We've developed online tools for that, which is a very easy way for organizations and a digital way, an online way to use the information from OneHR. In a way, that's the same for background verification. Background verification is, in the UN context, making sure that applicants who are recruited have been truthful in their application documentation, essentially, looking at academic credentials and professional experience. And then there's a third branch of the background verification, I'm sure that will sound very familiar, is that we look at prior conduct. That could both be criminal conduct, but also professional misconduct, which is obviously something that happens much more often. So the organizations that participate in the OneHR Center, we've built interfaces with their IT systems. If they have an applicant for a job and they need a background verification, the information is through the interface brought to the OneHR Center, all the application information, and then our team reaches out to prior employers, to academic institutions, and we run checks of a number of different misconduct or conduct-related databases. And here again, this is where the advantage of OneHR comes in. Once we've already checked a candidate for one organization, if another organization that uses OneHR is then recruiting the same individual because he or she is moving from one organization to the other, we obviously don't have to duplicate the work anymore. We can actually use the work that's already been performed by OneHR. We may need to do a supplemental check, but that's a very quick check because things may have happened since the last check. So that's really where the value added comes in from OneHR. I said earlier that OneHR is supposed to do the work faster and cheaper than when organizations would do it themselves in-house. Faster is easier to demonstrate. It's cheaper, a little bit more difficult, because it depends to a large extent on the volume of work that the OneHR Center processes and how quickly its database grows. I spent quite a bit of my time on managing the OneHR Center, but that means part of my salary needs to be paid by the organizations that participate in the OneHR Center. And of course, if it's only one organization, that can become quite costly. But if there are 10 or 15 organizations, then that part of my salary can be spread out over many organizations. So that's again an economies of scale argument and an efficiency argument. So that's why I said earlier, we have now quite a number of UN organizations that have joined over the years, but we need more organizations to join because that will actually then make the price of the services that we offer cheaper for everyone. So there's an incentive for each organization, but also an incentive for all the organizations together. I also said a little earlier that we're talking about updating our business model, our service model. We've called this OneHR 2.0. Still under development, but I've just listed here a couple of the challenges and opportunities that we see. I mentioned earlier the possibility to increase the number of services, add some services. Of course, ICT solutions. We have an ICT team within the UN that helps us, and we're constantly thinking about solutions and innovations that make it even more attractive for organizations to use us. I talked about the database. Of course, databases with personal information and data protection, they all are often used together in one sentence. So that's something that we obviously very cognizant of and try to navigate ourselves in that minefield of legal issues on data protection. And as I said, we need to increase the number of client organizations. And we've certainly been thinking and thinking about and discussing actually offering our services to non-UN system organizations. Now, for job classification, that may not be that relevant because we obviously use our own standards, but for background verification, that might actually be interesting for organizations that are outside the common system. So yeah, this brings me to the end. I hope, Robert, I haven't been looking at the time, my apologies, and Zarkele, I hope I kept it within 15 minutes. So this is the final slide of the presentation, just a little quote from the Secretary General. As I said, this One HR is one of the core pillars of his management reform. And there's a lot of focus on the One HR Center. And I wish I could take credit for its establishment, but obviously I cannot. I only joined about a year ago, so I inherited quite a bit of it, but it's a very interesting project with a lot of potential, which is why we are working on now using the experience gained and updating the model to make it more interesting for organizations, to make it more financially interesting to join us. Thank you, and I know there will be a little bit of time for questions and answers, Zarkele, later, but I've also indicated already, and we'll share that with you. If you have questions that you cannot answer in the Q&A, please ask Robert for my email contact, and I'll be happy to correspond over email and answer any additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you.